Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce today Fay Adams, who has retired after 44 years of teaching at the University of Tennessee as an associate professor emeritus. At the university, she served as the coordinator of the keyboard programs and taught piano pedagogy, and Suzuki pedagogy. You can read all about her numerous awards in the bio that I will put in a couple of minutes in the chat. But I would like to mention that she was a member of the MTNA Board of Directors, MTNA Senior Performance Competitions Coordinator, and was voted in 2016 the MTNA National Teacher of the Year. She's also a registered Suzuki piano teacher trainer and a former member of the Suzuki Association of the Americas Board of Directors. Today, Fay Adams will discuss for us the following intermediate piano teaching repertoire: Florence Price's Sonata in E minor, Chopin's Nocturne in C sharp minor, opus posthumous, Schumann's Soaring from the Fantasy pieces, and Debussy's first Arabesque, if we get that all in 1 hour. The choice of repertoire was selected after Fay Adams asked for possible pieces CAMTA members would be interested in, and a couple of board members responded with repertoire suggestions. Yes, please welcome with me Fay Adams.
Oh, gosh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here and happy to talk about something that's very close to my heart. I think intermediate repertoire is just one of the most important things that we expose our students to. I know when I was a young student, I played a lot of early method books, and then I changed teachers, and I immediately went to Beethoven sonatas and Chopin waltzes, and I kind of missed this intermediate level music. And I think that's one of the reasons that I love teaching it so much. I also think it's a great time to introduce our students to these great classical composers and also to our great 20th and 21st century composers. Chris Golston is right here, and his mom, who has passed away, Margaret, his pieces and her pieces have been throughout the years in our Federation Festival booklet. And his Brave Hawk, I tell you what, my boys love that Brave Hawk. I'm kind of tired of Brave Hawk, to tell you the truth, but it's a great piece. And I think I just had a workshop with my students this past Saturday, and we did a lot of our Federation pieces. And I think they're so worthwhile. So make sure that you're using those pieces also, that we're giving our students a good, well-rounded diet of classical music, both with our great masters and our present masters. So a shout out to Chris and to other composers. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of them today. I think in order to talk about intermediate repertoire, I want to talk about some of the biggest challenges in teaching this repertoire and things that I feel like we need to know how to teach. I hope you're not ever one of those teachers that says, go home and practice this. Go home and practice this balance of hands. Go home and practice this voicing of a chord. How do we practice those things? And so that's what I'm going to try to do today, is give you some ideas of how to practice some of these things that I think are so important. One of those things is fingering. I've had a lot of transfer students and a lot of students at the university who really, I wonder if they even know what those numbers mean above the notes. They do their own fingering all the time, and it drives me crazy. I always have my students to follow the fingering that's in the music, and if they don't like it, write in what they want to do, but not just haphazard fingering whatever finger feels like going on that note. And I think this is a great help for memory too, for memorizing those patterns with making sure that we're repeating that fingering. Also, if we do scales, arpeggios, and chords, they're learning patterns. So when they find those patterns in the music, they're going to do that fingering that falls so well under the fingers. The second thing is following the articulation. You know, there's so much articulation in our music. There's so much in our music. And I know, especially for those of you all, and I don't see anybody except one of you that's a Suzuki teacher, but our Suzuki students, you know, they're so used to doing everything without looking at the music. And when they finally, I'm going to move up because I'm just not seeing myself. Okay. When they finally are looking at the music, they're not really looking at the music. So I want my students to really study the score and study the articulation marks. And sometimes I'm amazed that they don't know what some of these articulation marks are. So we've got to make sure, even though we take for granted some of these things, we take for granted a tenuto marking that has 3 meanings. We know what that is. And we think we've told our students, and maybe we have, but we have to tell them more than once, maybe more than 10 times, maybe more than 100 times, to make sure they know what that articulation is. And also to know what's appropriate for this style of music, what's appropriate in the Baroque style, what's appropriate in the Impressionistic style. And so that's another thing that I really hope that you will talk to your students about is the characteristics of each one of those eras of music, so they know what's appropriate. They know when they're playing a Bach fugue that they're not going to pedal it with blending sounds together. So I think that's so important. Careful pedaling. Oh my goodness. You know, we have that old saying, pedal with our ears. Well, you know, I have a lot of students that pedal with cinder blocks on their ends of their legs. You know, they really are not good at pedaling. I think pedaling is one of the most difficult things. I love it when I have a student that can pedal with their ears, that can do gradual pedal changes and can hear what those pedal changes need to be. But it's hard to find those students. Have you ever found yourself crawling in the floor, helping them with the pedal? Have you ever found yourself putting your foot on top of theirs, or maybe they would put their foot on top of yours? I try not to do that, but anyway, so they understand correct pedaling. I think pedaling is one of the hardest things that we can do. And also learning things at a slow tempo and practicing at a slow tempo. I gave Yumi this handout that I have that has a lot of sayings from different peoples, athletes, writers, and a lot of pianists about slow practice. You know, I was at a workshop last summer, and I always got to the workshop early to practice. And so there was one man that always took me to the studio where I was teaching to let me in. And he said, you know, I had one of your students yesterday, and she and I started talking, and I asked her who her favorite pianist was. And she looked at me like deer in a headlight. She didn't know who a famous pianist was. And she said her teacher, and I don't remember who the teacher was, but you know, that's a nice compliment to the teacher. But I doubt she gets on YouTube and listens to some of these more difficult performances played by her teacher. And he said, but I asked her what her favorite sport activity was, and she immediately said she played basketball. And she immediately told him who her favorite basketball players were. So we've got to be careful that we introduce our students to wonderful pianists. You know, we want them to be listening to these wonderful performances and recordings. And we're so fortunate now. I know some of you are maybe the age that I am, and you know, we had to get a record. And you know, my parents didn't have a lot of money, so we couldn't buy a lot of records. So, you know, we couldn't listen to these wonderful performances, and we're so fortunate now. So take advantage of those wonderful opportunities that we have by assigning your students to listen to Ashkenazi or to listen to Long Long or whoever you like to listen to, giving those assignments. All right, I'm probably preaching to the choir. So let's go on and let's start with the Chopin Nocturne. I think Chopin's music probably reflects the way that he played. If we read a lot about Chopin, we read about what a lyrical pianist he was. And he didn't use any affectations. He didn't have any large motions or movements in his playing. It was very serene and beautiful. And I think his music shows us that that quality. We read about how he started his students. He always started his lessons with scales. He started with B major, then he went to F sharp, and then he went to C sharp or D flat. C major was the last scale he taught. I love reading that, even though I don't do that. C major is the first scale I teach, and it's the hardest. So we need to take heed from some of these wonderful things that I'm going to tell you about Chopin. He Then he would move on to Kramer etudes, and then he would move on to the Clementi Gradus ad Parnassum. So it's fun to read about what he did in his teaching. He was very strict with phrasing. He said that a piece that was phrased incorrectly was like listening to a speaker who was speaking in a foreign language. I think that's a wonderful thing to think about. We know that John Field was a forerunner of the Nocturne. You know, I don't know how many of you all have taught some of John Field's Nocturnes. I have. I think they're good pieces, but that's not really the best thing, I think, to introduce our students to it for Nocturnes. We know that if you look on the internet, you will see a Henley listing of the difficulty. What's the easiest nocturne and what's the most difficult nocturne? I love looking at those lists, even though sometimes I don't really agree with them. You know, I think as a teacher at the university, when people would audition, and maybe as a minor, they would all play this. Is not easy. I think that's one of the more difficult nocturnes because the left hand is so difficult. We have those huge jumps in the left hand, and then we're jumping to these awkward chords that have some kind of awkward fingering. And memorization, I think that's very difficult with this. I like to start with this nocturne, the E minor nocturne. That rolling left hand. If you look up the definition of a nocturne, it says it's a character piece with a beautiful melody and usually an arpeggiated left hand. I love that idea of the arpeggiated left hand because I feel like it fits the hand so much better than that low chord and then those difficult chords. So I like to start and you know, I like to tell you things to prepare for these pieces. You know, I always start with some Chopin preludes. I love those pieces. And as I was an intermediate student, I guess, I played lots of waltzes. I'm not sure my teacher knew anything but waltzes. We played lots of waltzes. I would have loved to have played one of these nocturnes, which I never played. And I think they're just some of the most beautiful pieces that you can play. It's been said that these nocturnes are the songs that Chopin never wrote. Chopin loved the voice, and I'll talk about that just in a minute. There's some beautiful recordings of this C-sharp minor nocturne by Midori, by Joshua Bell, by Perlman. Beautiful recordings that we can see how these string instruments really bring out this beautiful melody. This C-sharp minor nocturne was written in 1830 when he was only 20 years old and he was having a real hard time. He was living in Vienna and it was not a particularly productive time for him. And this piece was found after his death in stacks of music that someone found. And it was not published until 1870. Written in 1830, not published till 1870. It's said that it was played, it had some real pivotal points in the history of international history. There was a famous Polish pianist who played this right when Warsaw was being taken over by the Nazis. And then she also played it when the Nazis were defeated. It's also a piece that you find in the Pianist movie. I don't know how many of you all watch movies. I don't have time for movies, but anyway, the Pianist, I have watched that, and this is a good piece. Yes. Did you have, I can't remember your name. Wait, what's your name? Cynthia, did you have something to say? Oh, you're on mute, Cynthia. Oh, you're still on mute.
I saw the pianist.
Oh, you did? Did you like it?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, me too. And I love for you to talk, this workshop that I did last Saturday, the person that gave the workshop, one of my students said, I was amazed how much you all talked about different passages in these pieces. She said, don't you know how they're supposed to be? And I said, well, I try to know, but there's so many different ways of playing every piece. So, please share your ideas. When I talk about voicing and all that, please share your ideas. Okay? Let's see. This nocturne begins in a very curious way with a 4-measure introduction. I looked through all the nocturnes, and there are 3 nocturnes that begin with a 2-measure introduction, but those 2-measure introductions flow right on into the main part of the nocturne. I feel like this is really an introduction. This really introduces us to the piece. And so we'll start talking about it, because I think these first 4 bars are the hardest bars in the whole piece. I mean, some of you all may think the scales are the hardest. Well, that's a technical problem. If we can play the scales and I can't do them that well, you'll see. But, this beginning, this is a musical problem, I think. And it's something that, I study a lot with the students. I guess the first thing I'm going to talk about is voicing. And voicing is so important. Every piece that I will play today, there's some voicing challenges in that piece. Voicing gives us colors in the music. It shows us different lines that are important instead of just having all the lines important. It's just such a wonderful skill that we teach our students. So we look at this introduction, and yes, we want to make sure that we are voicing those chords so beautifully. It's very hard for the students to do. We want to hear. Oops. We want to hear the bass line and the top line. Now, how do you introduce voicing to your students? I'll show you a couple of exercises that I do with my students for voicing, and I would love for you to share things that you do. If we take that first chord, let's play the melody note loudly, and then play the accompaniment so very softly. Every time you do it, you're getting a little closer to they get the sound of that melody note in their ear. You could do it the opposite way. You could start with those whispering inner voices. I didn't do that very well. See how softly they can play those inner voices. We see the weight of the arm goes right down to that melody note. Okay, that's a great way to practice it. Then you might want to just play the chord and have them repeat that loud, the voice that they want to have heard, or play the chord and play the middle voices very, very quiet. Another thing that I like to do, sorry, I've got all my notes on a clipboard here, but another thing I like to do is to put my hand on my leg and and feel which finger we feel like needs the most weight. I think that's a great thing, and the students can feel that. They can see that, oh, that 5th finger is really, and I may do it to their leg and then let them do it to my leg to see if they're feeling that voicing. Now, there are lots of exercises we can do. I don't know how many of you all worked on Doc Nanya exercises, but I certainly did. And if you see how much I paid for it when I bought it and how raggedy it is, it was $5. So you see, it was a long time ago that I bought this. But exercise 2 and 3, I think, are great exercises for voicing. You know, the first one, the second one, you're having that nice melody note and the other voice is so quiet. Number 3, we're playing 2 notes at the same time. So we're working on bringing that third finger out and bringing out that fourth finger while we're going back and forth on 1 and 2. So I think those exercises, number 2 and number 3, I think those are the best in the Docnagny exercises. And while I'm talking about exercises, I haven't known about this book for a long time, and I don't really know how you pronounce it, Duvernois or Duvernoy, I don't know, but there's some wonderful exercises. It's a book of 25 exercises, and most of them are really good for balance of hands. You know, I think we need something other than the pieces we're playing for working on balance of hands. And there's also a really good voicing exercises in here, and I don't see where I have it written. 13, 16, and 20 in here. Great voicing exercises. You know, you don't have to give the book to everybody. You might want to make a copy or scan a copy and send it home with them so their parents can print it out and just work on that exercise away from the piece. So our end product has a nice singing melody and a good full bass. All right, now we need to talk about the shape of that melody. You know, if you listen to a lot of recordings, you hear how beautifully they shape that. And you know, I don't know how good you are at pointing out the melodic content and the harmonic content. And of course, it's the harmonies here that we would be pointing out to our students, that we start out with that C minor chord. And then we have a 5/7 of 4 going to a 4. So we know we're going to there, the shorter note to the longer note. And then guess what? We have another C sharp minor, and then we have an augmented, a German 6th going to a 5. We know that augmented 6 chords are predominant chords. They lead us to a dominant chord. Now that's as far as I go in music theory. I can't remember what I did in music theory all those 50 years ago, but I do remember my augmented chords. And what is an augmented chord? It's a chord built on the 6th degree of the scale, but it's a predominant scale chord. It leads to the dominant. This is a German 6th chord. We know we've got Italian, French, and German, but there's really no reason to call them French, Italian, or except for their makeup. Some of them don't have a third, etc. But this happens to be a German 6th, and it's leading to this F double sharp leading to that G sharp. So I love to point that out. So where are we going? If we play this succession of chords without a stop, we see that's where we're going. Okay, so I like to do that. Do it without the rest. Do it without having a pedal left, but showing the shape of the phrase. Okay, and now the pedal. Okay, there's so many problems in these first 4 measures, I think. The pedal is also a problem. You know, you hear students that play this and they play it black and white. There's a rest and the pedal lifts. So all of a sudden we have it off. We've got to lift that pedal. My internet connection is unstable. Oh, it went away. Okay, we have to lift that pedal gently. We have to lift our hands gently. It's an 8th rest, yes, but if we're a little bit late on that 8th rest, it's okay. So we're lifting our pedal gently, and we're lifting the chords with our wrist. Okay? Then these two measures repeat themselves. And I just put the soft pedal down. I hope I haven't played the first one too softly, but then I put the soft pedal down for the second two measures. Now, I want to get the tempo of these first 4 bars from measure 5. I'm going to talk about this left hand in a minute. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I take a little bit more time on that one, okay? And then we are to the A theme with that beautiful melody singing out. Balance of hands is so important here, so important. We know that this left hand is rather metronomic. We're playing that pretty strict, but the right hand is the hand that we're going to use some of that rubato with it. Oops, that wasn't very good. You know, Chopin is known to have said, "You must sing if you wish to play my music." That's pretty bad because I'm not a very good singer. But he wants that the melody line to sound like a vocal line. Ashkenazi wrote about Chopin's music. We must remember that Chopin loved opera. He loved the voice. And we must think how a great singer would sing this and play like that, because we know the voice is the most natural instrument in the world. So I love these little sayings that that pianists have said, and other composers. So we know when we think about rubato, and gosh, I'm going so long on this, but I just think this is important. When we hear about rubato, some of the late classical composers used rubato, but when we really think about the word, we think of Chopin. What does rubato mean? To rob. That's really the meaning of the word. We take away some beats from one measure and pay them back. You know, this is a payback measure. When we have those 2 bars of the left hand, you know, our left hand can come back with the tempo there. So if we think about Chopin's playing, I read that he would linger on notes longer, and sometimes he would push ahead to the next measure. So that was what his rubato was. His rubato was making the melody as expressive as possible. There's a saying by Liszt about Chopin's rubato, and it's this: "Look at those trees. The wind plays in the leaves. It stirs up life among them. The tree remains the same." That is the Chopin-esque rubato. So I love that. And I think that's something good to share with your students. So let's look at that left hand. You know, you'll have a student that'll come and they'll play the left hand. Yeah, they're getting the right notes and they're getting the right rhythms. But I think of those 4 notes as one gesture. And even though it's not the melody, we're still shaping that, okay? And when we come up to the, you know, probably they will either accent the thumb or the second finger. I mean, we can know what they're going to do, especially that one, because they're getting off of that note, going back down. But if we make that nice little circle and release with our wrist, we don't have that accent on that last note. So that is a wonderful thing to keep that left hand quiet, to keep a good balance of hands. Okay, and then the shape of the melody. What is the shape of the melody? Where is the important note? You know, you listen to your students and they're playing everything like a computer is playing it. Why? Because they don't know what the shape is. Have them play. Have them show you where the first phrase is. Have them decide where the most important note in the melody is. And it may be two notes, but make sure you point these things out. I know I'm so guilty of this, thinking, oh, my student knows that. Well, my students don't know that sometimes. So we have to really work on that, okay? All right, so we have a vocal. We have this vocal here. So 2 against 3, we're going to talk about 2 against 3 in Debussy, but this 2 against 3 is kind of easy because it's slow. So they can gauge where that second eighth note comes. Okay? All right, let's go on and look at the B theme, which is in measure 21. Ever heard that melody before? How about this? I'm not playing it right. What is that?
Chopin concerto.
It's a Chopin concerto. It's the second Chopin concerto, the third movement. Now, that was written in 29. That was written in 1829, and this was written in 1830. So maybe he's copying that melody, but we know composers use that same melody over and over again. So, in the Alfred edition of this, it says Pumoso, and it marks at 80. In the Cortot edition, and I've got a lot of Cortot editions because my piano teacher passed away and he left me all of his. He was one of Marcus's students and he's got every edition of everything. So I have a lot of Cortot, and Cortot marks it 90, wait, what is it? 92, which I think is way fast. But it goes to major. It goes to the major key. So I just think it has a lightness to it. Oops. We're still using that left hand circle idea to have 4 notes in a gesture, and we're having a long line in the right hand. Okay, now a very strange part to this piece is at the bottom of the page, and you just think, what on earth was he thinking here? He's gone back to his mazurka. What's a mazurka? Mazurka is a dance with an accent either on the second or the third beat, and he even marks an accent on the second beat in measure 35. And it's so interesting to look at it, different editions, measure 32 and 33. Paderewski has measure 32 a 3/4. And Cortot has it a 5/4. It puts both of those measures together. You know, doesn't really make any difference, but it's just kind of interesting to see what the different editions do. So, some editions mark animato here. Let's hope so, because if you played this in the same speed, somebody would think that didn't know anything about music. They would think, oh, well, that student's had a memory slip and they can't figure out where to go, because it repeats itself. So it moves on. And some of the editions don't have these right hand notes in them. Oh, we need those right hand notes to give us some melody to hold on to. Okay, let's see. Was there anything else I wanted to say about that? Measure 33. Okay, I've already talked about that. Okay, so let's look over, and the part that you may think is the hardest part in the piece. I mean, it's the hardest part for me, but it's the hardest part technically. And if I had really good fingers, Yumi knows I have a torn tendon in my third finger, and I had surgery on it, but it's torn again. So my third finger doesn't work very well. You can see how it just kind of droops over to the side. So that's a good excuse for not being able to play these scales as fast as they need to be played. But if we look at this scale, how do you teach this scale? You know, it's kind of difficult. If you look at measure 58, What I like to do is play the first note with the left hand and the top note. And then this one, just the bottom note and the top note together, because they have such a hard time trying to figure out where do I put that second and fourth notes. So I think first of all, you work on it with just the bottom note and the top note. And I do the D sharps together. Even though if you look at the music, you know, it's 18 and then 35 against 4. And even though some of us aren't great in math, we know that 18 and 35 aren't multiples of 4. So we have to kind of mold it in there. You know, and then after my students can do this and this, then we've got to figure out where the left hand goes with the second and fourth notes. You know, for some of them, I say, can you just play the second and fourth notes without having to line it up? And some of them can. Oops. I've got to get, here we go. If you want to know exactly where I put them together, in the first one, I put the F sharps together, which seems kind of strange because that's the third note. And then coming back down, I play it either with the D sharp or the E. Then the longer scales, I play the left hand F sharp with the C. So it's this C, and coming back down, I play it with the D, one note higher. Now you may do it all differently. I don't think it really makes any difference where that second and fourth notes go, but it does make a difference where the first and third notes go. So that's the way I teach that. Then the last ones, and it says delicately. And then we have these notes in the left hand. It resolves, tension, and resolution. And we know we have a Picardy third here. We're ending in major. Such a beautiful piece. And I forgot to say something. If you go back to the first of the piece, you know, I was talking so much about the balance of hands and the right hand being the melody and the left hand being the accompaniment. But if you look at measure 11, you have this. You know, you don't want to accent it a lot. So we have pum, 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 a nice little counter melody. Another hard thing to work on with the students. There are also some notes in 13. Those second notes in the left hand as a counter melody. Okay? Anybody have anything to add for the way you teach this piece? I love this piece. I want somebody to play it at my funeral. I love it. I think it's just a gorgeous piece. Don't you, I pick out things I want played at my funeral, you know? I want pretty piano pieces. I want all my students to come and play, you know? So, I just think it's a gorgeous piece. And students love playing this. You know, they love that scale. They think it's so much fun. It's so show-offy, you know, and they all love to show off. Anybody have anything to add about the way you work on voicing or any way that you shape the melodies or anything? I love comments. All right. Well, you're not going to make any money as a piano teacher. That's what I always tell my students when I say, what is your comment? And they don't have one. And I'll say, well, you're not going to make any money as a piano teacher if you don't have any ideas. So anyway, let's go on and look at the Debussy. I love to do Debussy now because Debussy said that Chopin was really the first impressionistic composer. Chopin used longer pedals. He used a lot of fourths and fifths. He uses a lot of added notes to the chords. So a lot of the characteristics of Impressionism. Okay, now, if I told you that, I told you things to introduce the C sharp minor prelude. So what do we introduce this Arabesque? It's one of the easiest pieces by Debussy, but it's still not easy. What do we give to introduce Debussy or Impressionism? It's hard to find. I think it's hard to find a real low level intermediate piece. The little Negro, and I like to call it Cakewalk to make sure that we're politically correct. It's a little easier. And, if you look at the listing of easier pieces by Debussy, they have the Children's Corner. I don't think the Children's Corner is any easier than this. We used to have intermediate workshops, and I played the Children's Corner for one of those workshops, and I thought it was hard. I thought all of those pieces were hard. But there is, and Chris will probably know about this from a well-known 21st century composer. It's Catherine Rawlin, and she has this book, Museum Masterpieces. And I actually have one of my students working on the star in this book, and she has it's a beautiful piece, and she says that she had looked at the artwork of Edgar Degas, and if you look in the middle of the book, she has pictures of all of the artwork that she has depicted in her compositions. So I think this is a great introduction. This is the earliest book. There's another book to this too. I think this is a great book to look at these paintings and see what we're depicting in our playing. If you talk about and you read about Debussy, you know that he didn't have a lot of good friends that were composers. His friends were literary people and artists, and he tried to take the ideas of the artwork or the books or the poetry and put that in his music. So I think that's really interesting. And we'll see that also in Schumann. I doubt we're going to get to Schumann. The things that we don't get to today, I have a lot of teaching points. And if you want the teaching points, I'm glad to send them. I'm going to try to go through this pretty fast because I want to talk a little bit about Florence Price, because I know she has become such an important composer just in the last couple years. Okay. All right, let's see. These arabesques were written 1888 to 1891. And it's really, I want my students to know what Impressionism is. And I think if you show them that picture of the water lilies by Monet, I think that's a great picture to show them. And, we've got the internet. We can pull those things up and we can tell them to look at that. We don't see the outlines of those water lilies. We see the impression of the water lilies, the impression of the figures, not the outlines of them. So we look at this piece. What's an arabesque? Have you had your students play in a master class and the master teacher says, well, what is this or what is that? And, again, deer in the headlights, what's an arabesque? And if it's a little girl and she takes ballet, she may know whatever ballet move it is. But another definition of an arabesque is beautiful curves played in a graceful way. An intricate pattern of interlaced lines. And we certainly see that in this arabesque. Debussy had these characteristics that he outlined himself as characteristics he wanted in his music. Effects of light and color. He wanted to create his composition so the piano did not sound like a percussion instrument. He wanted it to sound as though it had no hammers. That's a trip. That's a hard thing to do, right, Chris? He wanted to bathe his music in pedal. We know pedal. We're going to see a little bit of half flutter pedal in here, but we know when we get into the Impressionistic era, we're going to be using half pedal. And let me just say real quickly, this needed to be more than an hour for me to talk because I can't talk in an hour. But anyway, to do a half pedal, I have a little block and I put the block under the pedal, and it allows the student to depress the pedal just a little bit, so they can feel what a half pedal feels like, so they don't ram it all the way to the ground as most of them do. Pedaling, it's very difficult. It has to be very graceful, and most of the students really have a hard time with that. He never wrote fingering in his music because he felt like each hand was different. I agree with that. If you've got a good teacher that will guide you with that fingering. I know when I was growing up, I never looked at the fingering until I had a problem. And then when I had a problem, I would look at the fingering. But otherwise, I kind of did whatever I wanted to do. I was not a good person for following the fingering. He used other scales besides our major and minor. He used the Oriental scale. He used the pentatonic scale. He used the whole tone scale. He used all kinds of scales to give us different coloristic effects on the piano. He used chords without the third, that open fifth that gives us kind of a hollow feeling when we listen to it. Blended sounds, and also using the entire piano, all the registers in the piano. Okay, let's look at the arabesque. The arabesque is we have descending first inversion chords. I think that's kind of interesting. He doesn't have any root position chords here in the beginning. So this beginning, I think it feels like a wave. You might tell the students, you may want to draw a picture in the air with your hand, or you might want to think of a wave. So it goes up and comes back down. Seems pretty easy, doesn't it? Well, it isn't. It isn't easy for our students to do, I don't think. Maybe you have better students than I do, but I always think it's a problem. I always can hear when my right hand comes in or when their right hand comes in. They want to put an accent. I don't want any accent. I want it to sound like it's one hand playing it. Now, how do you do that? I think you break down. We have this great book that Suzuki, if you've taken this certain class in Suzuki, it's by Bob Duke, and it's called Intelligent Music Teaching. I think it's a great book, and it talks about breaking things down to the smallest point that the students can be successful. And here's one of those points. Breaking it down, I'm letting my right hand come in, but I'm letting my right hand come in where the A in the left hand has diminished to. So we don't have the right hand accented. And so I would stop and I would go stop, stop. I do a lot of stopping. Do a triplet and stop on the first note of the next triplet to make sure it's very smooth. Okay, so first one, second one less, and we start this pretty softly, and look what we have in our left hand. Wonderful bass line. Sometimes our bass lines get left out. And I think this is an important bass line. And at the same time, we have this wonderful rising figure in the right hand. And it rises all the way to the A. And this is a great place to do flutter pedal right here. I'm doing it very softly in one pedal. I'm going fast here. I'm sorry. I don't have much time here. Okay? And you saw how this crescendo to the A. Then if you look when the melody comes back again in measure 17, we start with that A, of course, and comes back down. Oh, weren't these composers just geniuses? I love that. the first idea of A builds up to the A, and the second time when it comes back, it starts at the A and comes down. Oh, I love that. Okay, let's look at our wonderful polyrhythm. Now, I told you in the E minor nocturne it was pretty easy, or that vocal part in the C sharp minor nocturne, it's slow, so the students can feel when that second note of the eighth note comes in the triplet. But when you're going fast here, oh heck no, they can't figure out where it's going. So I love to clap, and here we have three in the right hand. Later on, we have three in the left hand. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just so they can do that. I love to count 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. Nice cup of tea, nice cup of tea. I'll tell you, my teacher had a really bad saying, son of a, that's what he said for 2 against 3. So he's passed away now, so I can tell that story, but it works really well. Son of a, son of a. So it works really well. I'm an off-color piano teacher. So those are great ways to think about that. And I think the 2 and works really well, as long as the students go 1, 2, and 3, and not 1, 2, and 3. They have to learn that and just sticks in there between the 2 and 3. So I think that works well. Now, breaking it down to the smallest point, I would just start on beat 2. Doing that over and over again. And then I would go to the next one. Then I would go to the next one. And then to the next one. And we know in this pattern, we're going to that long note. Oops, I had an accent. I don't want any accents in there. 2, 3, 1, 2. My thumb wants to accent, but at least I only had one accent. Our students will have 3 or 4 accents there. Okay, I only have 3 minutes left, it looks like, so I'm not going to finish this. I have so many things about, this chain of 7th chords. I think that's one of the hardest things here. Oh, I love that. Now, don't you find that very difficult with the students? This is measure 34. We have to let them work on this in blocked chords. You can tell how many times I've worked on that with my students, that I can do that without looking. Also, a good way to practice that would be to do the melody note. And we're crescendoing and then diminuendoing at the top. And we want to hear that F sharp. And resolving to the E. So that is a great place to work, memory wise and finger wise, because we want to hear that melody note. Okay, is there anything else that's just, and rubato in the B section? Oh, that's a great place to do rubato. Oh, just a great place. And long pedals. Okay. All right. I just have to talk a little bit about Florence Price, okay, in my 2 minutes. I don't know how many, and I loved it that somebody suggested, and George Walker is kind of new for me, so I didn't go.
Fay,
Yes.
Fay,
Yes.
you can stay with the program as long as you can. Some members might have to leave, and I don't know what your time constraints are, but
Okay.
we're recording and we're listening.
All right. Do you want me to do more on Debussy?
I actually would really like to hear the Florence Price.
Okay, all right. Well, let's do. Okay, let's talk about Florence Price. You're an MTNA chapter. Did you see whose picture was on the front of AMT? There she is. I couldn't believe it when I got this magazine. Look at that. Talking about music education, including these African American composers in music education. I just couldn't believe it. I thought it's a saying, it's a sign that we need to talk about Florence Price. What I'm going to talk about is the second movement, because the first movement is so long. I love the third movement, but I'm going to talk about the second movement because you're going to see how much I like lyrical pieces, and it's a very lyrical piece. Florence Price was born 1887. And you know, I think the most interesting thing about her is she's the first African American composer to have a piece played by a major orchestra. And guess what that orchestra was? The Chicago Symphony. And that was in 1933, so she was 46 years old when she finally had this performed with a major orchestra, but it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. I don't know if you've listened to it. It's the first symphony. It's also in E minor. The sonata's in E minor. She must have loved E minor. So you need to listen to it. It's beautiful. And you need to listen to the piano concerto because it's beautiful too. She's a beautiful composer. She majored in piano and organ at New England Conservatory, but she also was a singer, and you can tell that from this piece. You can tell that she was a singer. And she talked about her style of composing, that African American music always depends on rhythm. Rhythm is so important. She says rhythm is important to all African Americans in everything they do. So she was very concerned about having a rhythm in her music that carried through that movement. And you'll see in this second movement, she does have a rhythm that carries through. And she talks about, she combines the American spirituals and melodic devices of African American people. Plus, she uses late romantic writings, and I think you'll see that. She also wasn't very strict with the form of the sonata. And this is a second movement, and this is a rondo. And you know the most famous second movement rondo we have is, so a good model, the second movement of the Pathétique. So maybe she thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. So this is a rondo. I think the hardest things about this piece, again, it's voicing. And the voicing is very difficult, but she must have had big hands. You know, I always think when a composer, so Chris, remember this, when a composer uses big stretches in their music, they don't realize that everybody doesn't have a hand like they have. But there's some big stretches in this music. You know, when I first heard it, you know, the first motive is, you know, and when I first heard it, I started to think of, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. You all know that. I've played that for so many people to sing. I thought, oh my gosh, she's using that. But no, sometimes I feel as a major third, and this is a minor third. Let's see. And you're going to hear those rich middle lines that she uses in her music. The first phrase is a 4-bar phrase. In 2 measures, it kind of goes up. The last 2 measures closes the phrase and back down. It's in C major with an added 6th. I don't know, Chris. You know, I hope that's what that is. You know, Chris is going to be better at, he can go much farther than an augmented 6. So, you know, I don't know what that is, but that's what I'm saying it is. Then she goes up and uses that same third, but with a rich sounding chord. And you heard heard how I had to roll the left hand. You know, and our students have to be very careful about that because we want to make sure that we get the bottom note of that roll chord in the pedal. But in order to do that, we're going to have to hold the other hand. This is what I think. You're going to have to hold the other hand so you don't have a big hole in the music. So if we didn't hold that, you heard that hole there? So if you hold on, oops, I didn't do a very good job. I'm holding that E while I get the bottom note of that chord. And then we've come to the top of the melody. Oops. Okay, I'm going to play that again. I played some wrong notes. Beautiful melody. Now we have this same idea, up an octave with an added rolling left hand. Beautiful. It's the same idea, and up and back down. So we had a 4-bar phrase, and can't you imagine somebody singing that? Maybe a baritone, and then a little bit higher, and then the next idea is just a little teeny bit of what we just did. It's like measure 2 and measure 6, but it's like she's got a two-bar transition. You know, it's said that she puts little cadenzas here and there, or little vocal sections here and there. I think that's one of them. It's a transition, but you know, like this measure, it's just leading us back to the beginning. We have an A flat now. And repeated motifs. I think that's just beautiful. And now, like the beginning, but voicing with the middle voice in the right hand. Another one of those vocal things, and another entrance of the, and again. And I didn't play every note perfectly there, but I did my best, okay? So the B section, I love the B section. The B section moves on a little bit. You know, the first rhythmic figure was, and she uses that 16th, 8th, 16th throughout the A section. Now the B section, she uses a dotted 8th note and a 16th. And the same thing, but up an octave. Now we've got the melody in the bass. And another little interlude. And now we've got the melody in the alto. becomes a lot thicker. This one measure, I don't know what the notes are supposed to be, because if you play what it says, so I'm doing C sharps and a D to lead to D major. Anybody know what those notes are supposed to be? That's the craziest measure. I mean, it's a very crazy measure. I've listened to lots, there are lots of recordings of this, lots of recordings. I can't tell what anybody's doing. Maybe Chris could do it. He could listen, and I'm not good at listening to a recording and saying, oh, that's a D. I'm not good at that. So I can't figure that out. But I love the way she develops the theme and adds those triplets. Again, voicing is so important. Oh, here we go. That's the best I can make out of that measure. And it keeps on going, and it builds and it builds, and it gets to an F sharp, and then she does this kind of a cadenza, and then she goes back. Don't you think it's beautiful? It's kind of a haunting melody. So I think it's a gorgeous piece to teach our students. I think one of the best things about it, it feels kind of improvisatory. And I think students love to have that feeling of not being so strict. And I think you can push and pull with the theme and the tempo. I think it's just a great piece. I will send you notes on the Schumann if you would like for me to. The Schumann piece is so bipolar. I mean, he had to be bipolar. He had the Eusebius and Florestan, and he had to be. And to hear about some of the things that he did, oh my gosh. Sweet Clara married him anyway, but he did some very strange things, but I love his music. I actually played that whole set on a faculty recital many years ago. And it's a great set, but probably Soaring might be the hardest of all the pieces. Grilling, oops. I think that one's a little bit easier than Soaring, but I have a lot of program notes on that if you're interested in it. And I want you to read the comments or read the sayings about slow practice that Yumi is going to share with you. And Yumi's heard me say this lots of
I
times.
put it in the chat.
What?
I put it in the chat. It's in the chat.
Okay. How I always say slow practice gives fast results. Fast practice gives slow results. No practice gives no results. So I just love to say that. I'm sorry, but I do need to go because I have a Zoom meeting at 1:30 that I have to present at, and I need to get those notes together. So sorry, I just talk so fast. So I hope you've learned something. If you can just take one idea from this, I always feel like if I can just take a couple of ideas, I think by the time I die, we'll all be good piano teachers. Don't you think? There's so much to learn, so much to do, and so much to love in all the literature that we have. So thank you for inviting me, and I love seeing you, and I love seeing the people that I know. And take care and practice, practice. Get your students to practice. Okay? So, bye.
Thank
Faye,
you.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for an insightful presentation. You have such a charming way to present. It feels like being at a team meeting personally with you, and then casually you're sharing all your teaching tricks and tips, and then you play your beautiful playing. It was very helpful. I saw many teachers taking notes. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. It was
Oh,
just
you're so
beautiful.
sweet.
And it would be wonderful if you could share with us the notes about the other pieces. And I
will.
will send it out. I took a screenshot of the participants and I will email it out then to everyone who was here.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for going overtime. Thank you, Faye.
All right. Okay. Bye
Thank you.
bye.